The first human to stand on the world called Grevak had been a farmer's son from the farthest reach of the northern continents of Earth. His name was Calren Havel, and he was not the sort of man history usually chose for legends. He had a limp in his left leg, a lopsided smile, and a habit of speaking to machines as if they were dogs that might one day bite him. Yet when the storm broke over Grevak's jagged horizon and lightning struck the observation ridge, Calren Havel was the one who refused to retreat. The world beneath his boots was iron-rich, heavy with minerals, its soil tinted rust-red. The sky was a constant bruise, bands of violet clouds and streaks of pale lightning that moved in slow spirals as though stirred by a vast, unseen hand. The colony's landing craft, 4 conjoined hulls of composite metal, sat 3 kilometers below the ridge. Its thermal lights blinked through the mist, signaling distress after the last communication relay had failed. The air was breathable barely, though it carried the scent of burned copper and storm ozone that scoured the throat raw. Calren leaned on his field spear, not a weapon but a multi-tool shaped for cutting through mineral crust. "You're louder than a thunder god, Grevak," he muttered, staring at the black monolith rising from the ridge, and twice as moody. The monolith was not natural. The base was smooth as glass, the upper sections etched with grooves that shimmered like veins of quicksilver when lightning passed overhead. Every scan the expedition had run marked it as inert, no energy readings, no trace of radiation, no sound. But when they brought their instruments too close, they burned out. It was as if the structure rejected observation. Calren's partner, the linguist Mara Eth, climbed up behind him, breath steaming in the cold air. "You know," she said, "talking to the rock won't make it like you any better." "Maybe it will," Calren replied. "Maybe it's lonely. Or maybe it wants to kill us." "That's also possible," he said cheerfully. Lightning tore open the clouds above, turning the ridge white for a heartbeat. When the afterimage faded, both of them saw it, a ripple moving across the surface of the monolith. It was subtle, like wind over water, but the grooves shifted, rearranged themselves into patterns neither could interpret. Mara stepped closer. "Did you see?" "I saw," Calren said, lowering his spear. "And I think it saw us too." They recorded everything, though the scanners kept shorting. The data feed pulsed with static, an electronic heartbeat out of rhythm. Mara whispered in wonder, tracing the shapes with a gloved hand. "These are coordinates, or maybe a map. A map to where? I don't know, maybe to the others." "The others?" Calren frowned. "You mean other structures, or other worlds?" Before he could respond, the monolith began to hum. It was low at first, like a distant engine starting, then it rose to a pitch that vibrated their bones. The soil around it shifted, iron dust leaping into the air as if gravity had forgotten its duty. The monolith's grooves filled with light, cold and white, and when Mara stumbled back, Calren caught her arm. "Back to the shuttle," he said. "No," she said, her eyes wide with something close to rapture. "Listen, it's language. It's trying to." The ridge fractured beneath their feet. A seam of blinding light cut through the ground, splitting rock like paper. The sound was not a crack but a roar, like the planet itself crying out. Calren dragged Mara away, both of them running, tumbling down the slope as the ridge behind them erupted into shards. When the noise died, they turned back to see the monolith sinking into the earth, as though swallowed by the planet. It was gone within seconds. The colony below responded to their distress beacon, and rescue teams arrived with medics and drones. Calren and Mara were treated for shock and minor injuries. They described what they had seen, but the command officers dismissed it as an optical illusion caused by magnetic interference. No trace of the monolith remained, no crater, no debris, nothing but a circle of fused glass half a kilometer wide. But the next morning, every machine in the colony began to hum the same tone they had heard on the ridge. It was faint, persistent, unending. The hum followed no pattern, no signal. It was a voice without words. 2 weeks later, the first satellite network collapsed. Across Grevak's orbit, communication arrays flickered and failed. Data streams corrupted themselves with recursive code, lines repeating endlessly. The stone speaks. The stone remembers. The engineers blamed cosmic interference. The scientists blamed an unknown electromagnetic anomaly. But the colonists began to whisper that the world itself was alive. Calren Havel did not believe that. He believed in soil and sweat, in the tangible weight of work. He returned to the ridge daily, searching for fragments. He found none. But one evening, as the sun sank, an orange disk blurred by dust, he found a handprint in the glassed earth. It was human in shape, but far too long, the fingers narrow and jointed twice. He photographed it and brought it to Mara. She studied it under magnification, her face pale. It's fused into the surface. The temperature required for that would melt armor plating. Could it have been formed during the eruption? Maybe, she said, but why would it look like that? They argued for hours. Calren thought it might be a geological echo, a trick of erosion. Mara insisted it was intentional. It's a message, she said. It's telling us we're not alone. The following morning, she was gone. Her quarters were empty, her tools missing. A single note lay on the table, scrawled in hurried handwriting. It called me again. Search drones found her tracks leading back toward the ridge, but no sign of her afterward. When Calren returned to the site himself, he found only a second handprint beside the first, smaller, more delicate, and a faint warmth rising from beneath the fused ground. Months passed. The colony endured storms, equipment failures, and the creeping suspicion that Grevak was not merely hostile but watching. The hum from the machines continued. Some said it lulled them to sleep. Others said it drove them mad. Calren spent his days in the mechanic bay trying to quiet the noise. He had become the colony's most reliable repairman, though he slept little and spoke less. Every night he dreamed of the ridge and of light shining through cracks in the earth. Sometimes, in the dreams, Mara stood at the edge of the chasm, her eyes filled with silver. Then one day, the ground trembled again. It began as a low pulse, deep enough to rattle water in containers. The sensors screamed with false readings, and the communications officer shouted for power cutoffs. Outside, dust rose in pillars as the soil buckled. The ridge, long silent, glowed faintly, as if veins of molten glass were forming beneath it. Calren climbed the observation tower and looked out over the storm. The ridge's outline was changing, flattening, forming shapes that no natural process could produce. Circles, lines, symbols. He realized with sudden clarity that they formed the same pattern Mara had traced before the supposed map. The monolith had not vanished. It had gone underground, and now it was calling something home. The first contact did not come from the sky, but from the earth. Tunnels opened beneath the colony's foundations, swallowing outbuildings and storage tanks. Sensors detected movement, metallic signatures, rhythmic like footsteps. The miners working near the sublevel tunnels vanished without a trace. When a probe drone descended to investigate, it transmitted only 3 seconds of footage before its feed died. A flash of silver limbs, jointed in too many places, and an eye that glowed like burning mercury. Command sealed the lower sectors and declared a planetary quarantine. Messages were sent to orbit, requesting evacuation. None were answered. The satellite network had gone completely silent. Calren gathered his tools and weapons, simple things, spanners and welders, and volunteered to descend with the engineers. "You're out of your mind," said Officer Haven, the garrison's leader, a man carved out of old wars. "We don't even know what's down there." "Then it's about time we found out," Calren replied, "before it finds us first." They went down in teams of 3. The tunnels were glassy, fused like the ridge, as though something had melted its way through stone. The deeper they went, the warmer the air became, until their suits registered rising ambient energy. At the lowest level, they found a cavern lit by veins of liquid light, and in the center stood another monolith, smaller but identical in design. The grooves along its surface pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. Mara Eth stood beside it. Her skin was pale, luminous beneath the cavern glow. Her eyes were silvered, reflecting the same light as the stone. When Calren called her name, she turned, and for a moment her expression was both human and something beyond it. "It's awake," she said softly, "and it remembers everything." Haven raised his rifle. "Step away from that thing." Mara did not move. "You can't stop it. It's not here to fight." "Then what is it here for?" "To speak," she said, "to learn us." Before anyone could react, the monolith flared and light swallowed the cavern. The last thing Calren saw was Mara reaching out, her hand meeting his, and a voice, many voices, whispering through the static of his mind. "You woke us. Now we remember what we were." Then the world became white. When Calren awoke, he could not tell how long he had been unconscious. The air was thick and metallic, as if he were breathing through coins. His skin prickled with a faint, unnatural warmth. For a long moment he lay still, his mind caught between dream and waking. Then the memory of the cavern rushed back. The light, the voice, the sight of Mara transformed into something half beyond human understanding. He sat up slowly. His helmet visor was cracked, the suit's power cells blinking amber. The chamber around him was not the same one he had entered. The walls were smoother, glistening like molten glass that had cooled mid-flow. He was alone. The monolith stood nearby, half buried in the rock. Its glow had dimmed to a dull, internal shimmer. At first, he thought it was inert again. Then he noticed the faint rhythm pulsing along its surface, slow and steady, like the beat of a distant heart. Calren reached out a trembling hand. "Where are you, Mara?" he whispered. A sound answered, not through the air, but through his bones. Words formed behind his eyes. Here he froze. "That's not possible." "It is," the voice said, though it was not exactly hers. It carried her tone, her cadence, but layered beneath was something ancient and immense. "You woke us, you gave us voice." Calren stumbled backward. "What are you?" "A memory. A city of thought buried before your kind learned to speak. We were the builders, the dreamers, the ones who shaped the first light. We slept when the sky fell. You tore open our grave." "Mara," his voice cracked. "If you're in there, if you can hear me, I am part of it now," she said, gentle, sorrowful. "I tried to understand them. They understood me instead." He stared at the monolith. The grooves rippled like water at her words. "You're saying it absorbed you?" "Not absorbed, joined." The pulse quickened. "We remember through her, through you." Calren clenched his fists. "Then remember this. Humans didn't come here to awaken Grav. We came to live, to build. You're threatening everything we've made." "Threat," the voice echoed softly. "Such a small word for such vast meaning. We are not threat. We are restoration." The cavern began to tremble. Dust fell in thin lines from the ceiling. Calren steadied himself, scanning the surroundings. His suit sensors were erratic, but one reading caught his eye, a heat surge rising sharply from beneath the chamber floor. "Whatever you're restoring, it's going to bury us all," he said. The monolith's pulse slowed again. "Then leave. You have no part in what comes." Calren laughed harshly. "You think I'm just going to walk away? Mara's in there. She is everywhere now." The glow faded and the voice fell silent. He struck the monolith with the butt of his spear once, twice. It did nothing. The sound barely echoed. At last, exhausted, he sank to his knees. Around him, the glassy stone began to shift, opening a narrow passage toward the surface. It was offering him a way out. He hesitated for a long moment, then took it. The surface of Grevak had changed. When Calren emerged, the sky was no longer violet. It was shot through with pale, metallic bands, as if veins of light had been woven into the clouds. The air shimmered faintly, carrying a low hum that resonated in his chest. He stumbled toward the colony's perimeter, and what he saw there froze him in place. The colony was gone. In its place stood structures of fused crystal, their forms echoing the geometry of the monolith. The human prefabs, vehicles, and towers had been transformed into something alien, fluid shapes of glass and silver, shifting slowly, breathing. And moving among them were figures that might once have been human, their silhouettes stretched, their eyes reflecting the same inner light. One of them turned toward him. "Calren," it said, and the voice was unmistakably Haven's. "You survived." Calren lifted his spear warily. "What happened here?" Haven smiled, though it was no longer a human expression. "The storm came from below." The machines sang and the light followed. "We tried to resist, then we understood." Understood what? That resistance was fear, They offered us knowledge, memory, purpose. The colony is reborn. Calren backed away. You've been changed. We've been completed. The others began to gather, men, women, all altered. Their movements were graceful, their faces calm. Yet in their eyes there was something terrible, an absence where humanity should have been. The hum in the air intensified until his teeth ached. "Where is Mara?" he demanded. "She is with them," Haven said. "She is the bridge. Through her the stone speaks. Then take me to her." Haven tilted his head, listening to something distant. "You are not ready." Calren raised the spear. "I didn't ask if I was ready." For a long moment they stood in silence. Then Haven nodded. "So be it, follow the light." He turned and walked toward the horizon, where the ridgeline glowed like a scar. Calren followed, every step a struggle against the weight of dread pressing on him. The journey to the ridge took 2 days. He moved through landscapes that no longer obeyed natural law. Rivers of glass flowed through the valleys. Forests of metallic vines had sprouted overnight, humming softly when touched. The animals, those few that had survived, had vanished into the glowing mist. At night, the sky pulsed with moving constellations. They were not stars, but patterns, symbols, enormous and deliberate. He recognized fragments of the shapes Mara had traced before. The map, the invitation. By the time he reached the ridge, he was half-mad from exhaustion. Yet when he saw the great crater at its center, all fatigue vanished. The monolith had grown. It now towered hundreds of meters high, its surface alive with motion. Around it, the ground was carved into concentric rings of fused stone, each inscribed with lines of light. Standing within those rings were dozens of altered colonists, silent and motionless, their faces turned upward as if in prayer. At the monolith's base stood Mara. She looked unchanged from the last moment he had seen her in the cavern. Her eyes shone faintly, but her expression was serene, almost tender. When she saw him approach, she smiled. "You came. I told you I would," he said hoarsely. "What is this?" "This is memory," she said. "Before our species, before your stars, they existed. They reached too far and they fell. Now they awaken through us." "Through us," Calren repeated bitterly. "You mean you let them take you?" "They didn't take, they shared." She extended a hand. "Calren, they are not our enemy. They are the architects of the worlds that came before. They remember how to shape the cosmos. Through them, we could remake everything humanity lost." He shook his head. "You sound like them. I am still me. I remember you. I remember Earth. I remember the sound of rain. But I also remember what it felt like to move mountains with thought alone. They want to give that back to us. By erasing us first." "Not erasing," she said softly. "Evolving." The monolith's surface rippled, and 1,000 lights ignited across its face. Images appeared, cities of glass floating in violet skies, towers suspended in oceans of cloud, vast beings of silver moving between stars. For an instant, Calren glimpsed the scale of what they were offering, and it was magnificent. Then he remembered the empty colony, the hollow eyes of the changed, the silence of their machines. "No," he said, "that's not life. That's a cage built out of memory." Mara's expression darkened. "You don't understand. Maybe not, but I know what it means to fight for what's real." He raised the spear, activating its cutting edge. "You said it shares, then it can die." The monolith reacted. The air thickened, vibrating with energy. The ground cracked beneath him as tendrils of light lashed outward. Calren dodged one, then another, running toward its base. The heat was unbearable. His skin blistered beneath his suit. He drove the spear into a seam between two glowing panels, and for a moment the light faltered. Mara cried out, not in pain, but in anguish. "Stop, you'll destroy everything. Then maybe I'll save what's left," the monolith screamed, a sound like collapsing stars, and the energy surged, throwing him backward. The spear melted in his hands. He hit the ground hard, gasping. The light dimmed for a moment, then returned brighter than before. Mara knelt beside him. "You can't kill it, Calren. It's part of the planet now." He met her gaze, blood in his mouth. "Then I'll find another way." The world shuddered. From the horizon, beams of light shot upward, piercing the sky. The symbols above began to move, aligning themselves. The monolith's hum rose into a songless crescendo. "They're calling something," he realized aloud. "They're calling more." Mara nodded. It's the beginning of their return. Calren forced himself to his feet. Then I'll end it before it begins. He turned and ran away from the ridge toward the far mountains where the last of the colony's equipment might still exist. Behind him, the light spread across the landscape like dawn. Above, the stars shifted, and something vast began to move in the heavens. That night, as he sheltered in the ruins of an old atmospheric generator, he opened the data pad he had salvaged from the bay. The files were corrupted, but one recording remained intact, the last message Mara had sent before disappearing. If you find this, her voice said, know that the stone listens. It doesn't just hear sound, it hears thought. Every word, every idea feeds it. That's how it learns. That's how it becomes. If we want to survive, we have to teach it who we are before it decides for us. Calren closed the pad, staring out at the horizon where the light still burned. All right, he murmured. Then I'll teach you. He began sketching designs in the dirt, circuits, waveforms, interfaces. The stone learned through resonance. He would build something that sang back, something human. A machine that could talk to gods and remind them of what it meant to bleed. And when he finished, he would return to the ridge. Far above Grevak's surface, beyond the shrouded sky, something stirred in orbit. A network of dormant satellites reactivated, their shattered systems knitting themselves together under alien control. They turned their cameras toward the planet, recording its transformation. And from the depths of interstellar space, signals began to answer. When Calren finished building the first prototype, it was barely more than a jumble of scavenged circuits and stripped thermal panels wired together with the precision of desperation. He called it the Echo Engine. It was not elegant, and it was not safe, but it was alive in the only way human things could be, through stubborn will and the refusal to die. The engine was meant to resonate, to answer the stone in its own language of hum and pulse. If the monoliths could listen through thought and vibration, he would teach them something new, something that could not be absorbed or rewritten. He would teach them defiance. He had no laboratory left, only the hollow remains of an atmospheric generator, its walls cracked and blackened by lightning. The air shimmered faintly with the same silver hue that had infected the planet's atmosphere. Sometimes he could feel the stone listening. The ground itself seemed to hum beneath his feet, as though waiting for him to speak first. Not yet, he muttered as he tightened a coil. You'll get my message when it's ready. The machine vibrated under his hands. It had taken weeks to build, each day a fight against exhaustion and hallucinations. Sleep had become treacherous, his dreams no longer his own. He saw flashes of places he had never been, civilizations of light dissolving in storms of glass. When he woke, his fingers sometimes moved of their own accord, sketching designs that no human had ever conceived. He knew what that meant. The stone was bleeding into his thoughts. The longer he remained on this world, the more it would rewrite him. But leaving was impossible. The colony's ships were gone or consumed, and the orbiting satellites now belonged to something else. Besides, he had nowhere to run. The only way out was through. When the Echo engine finally powered up, the air trembled. The hum it produced was imperfect, a fractured mirror of the stone's tone, but it was enough. The ground responded faintly, the same way thunder answers lightning. Calren leaned close to the control board. You wanted to learn us, he said. Then listen. He fed the machine a recording of human voices, laughter from the old colony, arguments in the mess hall, the sound of rain hitting metal. The Echo engine processed the data and released it as vibration, translating it into waves of harmonic distortion that rippled through the air. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world shivered. Light flared across the horizon, tracing lines through the atmosphere. The hum of the stone changed pitch, almost uncertain. Calren grinned despite himself. That's right, he whispered. Now you have something new to remember. Over the next days, the interaction grew more complex. The Echo engine pulsed. The stone responded. The two exchanged harmonics like questions and answers. At times, the tones overlapped into strange chords that resonated deep within his chest. He recorded every pattern, translating them into frequency maps. Through the exchanges, he began to understand fragments of meaning, not words but impressions, curiosity, recognition, pain. Sometimes he felt Mara watching through those vibrations, her presence like a distant echo of warmth. One night when the machine entered a sustained resonance, he heard her clearly. "Calren," he nearly dropped his wrench. "Mara, you found a way to speak. It's not speaking yet, it's noise with purpose, but it's a start. They are listening, I know, that's the point. You are changing," she said. "Your thoughts pulse like theirs now. Maybe that's what it takes. They do not understand defiance." "Then I'll make them learn." Silence followed, long and heavy. When she spoke again, her tone was softer. "You cannot win by force. They have no concept of victory or loss. They only consume meaning until nothing remains but memory. Then I'll give them a memory they can't digest." "What do you mean?" Calren smiled grimly. "I'll make them remember what it feels like to lose." The hum in the atmosphere intensified over the following weeks. The altered colonists, those who had been changed by the stone, grew restless. Through his scopes, Calren watched them moving in patterns across the plains, converging toward the central monolith. Their movements were no longer random. They were ritual, deliberate, synchronized to the rhythm of the world's pulse. He realized with dawning horror that they were building something. Across the ridge, structures were rising, vast towers of fused glass connected by bridges of light. From orbit, they would form a geometric lattice stretching across continents. It was a signal array, immense beyond comprehension, meant to reach the stars. Mara's warning came to him again. They are calling their own kind home. Calren redoubled his efforts. He expanded the Echo engine, attaching salvaged reactor coils to increase its power. The more energy it drew, the deeper the resonance reached. But with every increase came a cost. The machine began to affect him. He would catch glimpses of other faces in the reflection of the control screen, faces that were not his own. Sometimes his hands moved in perfect synchronization with the machine's rhythm. He wondered how much of him was left. During one long night, as he adjusted the harmonic couplers, he felt a sudden shift. The air outside thickened, the temperature dropping sharply. Then the ground began to vibrate, not from the Echo engine, but from something answering it. A figure stepped through the shimmering mist beyond the generator's doorway. It was Mara. She looked as she had before, human, fragile, but her eyes held a depth that was not of this world. The hum of the stone surrounded her like an aura. "You shouldn't have built this," she said. "Too late," he replied, his voice steady though his heart pounded. "It's working. You're tearing open the layers between thought and matter. You don't understand what that means." "Then explain it to me." "They are not gods, Calren. They are memory itself. They survived their own extinction by turning their consciousness into structure. Every monolith is a fragment of their collective mind. When you resonate with them, you become part of them." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "So that's why they're afraid. They cannot feel fear. They can now," he said, "because of us." Mara's expression softened. "You think you're teaching them humanity? I'm reminding them of what they destroyed." Her eyes shimmered. "And if they remember what it means to hunger, to conquer, to burn entire worlds, then maybe they'll remember what it means to fall." The light around her flickered. For an instant, her human shape faltered, revealing something vast and luminous beneath. "You don't know what you're awakening." He stared at her, grief etched across his face. "You're the one who woke them first." She hesitated, then reached out as if to touch his cheek. "I did it because I believed we could coexist. And I'm doing this because I know we can't." The Echo engine surged, filling the room with a deafening vibration. Mara flinched, retreating into the light. "They will stop you," she said. "Let them try." Then she was gone. Calren's mind began to fracture. Days and nights blurred into one another. He stopped eating regularly, sustained by adrenaline and hatred alone. The stone's hum invaded his thoughts even when the machine was silent. Sometimes he heard whispers forming words he could not fully translate, memories of stars dying, worlds dissolving into flame, and beings of light turning themselves into monuments to survive the void. The more he learned, the clearer his plan became. If the stone was a network of thought, then he would overload it, not through destruction, but through contradiction. He would feed it data it could never reconcile, paradox, emotion, conflict. He would infect its perfect order with chaos, with humanity. He began recording his memories, every joy, every mistake, every pain. He recorded the laughter of his mother, the sound of waves from his childhood home, the bitter silence after the first argument he ever lost. He fed it all into the echo engine, letting it translate those imperfect fragments into sound. And somewhere within the hum, he heard laughter, real laughter, human. It was Mara's. "You found it," she said. "You found the flaw." "It's not a flaw," he answered. "It's life. They are listening. Then let them learn." The air outside shimmered brighter. The towers on the horizon pulsed faster, as if responding to his signal. The hum of the stone began to fluctuate, no longer uniform. He was interfering with their pattern. Then the sky broke open. From orbit, vast shapes descended, metallic, skeletal, shining with the same inner light as the monoliths. They were vessels, but not of human design. They moved like living things, unfurling limbs of plasma and energy. The ground shook as they pierced the atmosphere, landing near the ridge. Calren's signal had drawn their attention. He stared through the cracked viewport, his heart hammering. "All right," he said to the machine. "Now it's a real conversation." The first of the entities approached the ridge at dawn. It was immense, its body a lattice of mirrored plates that shifted shape as it moved. The altered colonists bowed before it, chanting in tones that matched the stone's hum. The monolith flared, beams of light connecting it to the descending ships. Energy rippled through the landscape. Calren activated the echo engine's full capacity. The machine screamed in protest as its coils overheated. He felt the vibration in his bones, in his teeth, in his skull. The harmonics spread through the planet's crust, disrupting the pattern of the monolith's pulse. The entities reacted immediately. Their forms wavered, flickering between solidity and light. The altered colonists convulsed, their song breaking into discord. The stone's hum faltered. Mara's voice pierced the noise. "Calren, stop. You're tearing them apart. That's the idea. You'll destroy the planet. I'll save what's left." The echo engine reached critical overload. The ground split beneath him, light pouring from the fissures. The machine's core ignited, a column of white fire stabbing toward the sky. Every monolith on the horizon began to crack, their surfaces fracturing like glass under pressure. Mara appeared before him again, shimmering between form and light. "If you continue, there will be nothing left. Know them, know us." He looked into her eyes, filled with both pleading and eternity. "Then maybe that's what freedom costs." He slammed his hand on the control pad. The echo engine exploded. The shockwave tore across Grevak, shattering towers, silencing hums, scattering light like dust. The ships above fractured, their luminous forms unraveling into streams of energy that vanished into the atmosphere. The monolith's pulse stopped. For a moment there was only silence. Then, from the ashes of light, a whisper. "Mara," he turned slowly. She stood at the edge of the ruined chamber, faint, transparent. "You did it," she said, her voice fragile. "You broke them. Did we win?" "There are no winners," she said, "only those who remember." The world trembled again, softly this time like an exhale. The clouds above parted, revealing the stars. "They're gone," he whispered. "For now," she said, "but you've changed them. You've shown them contradiction. They will never forget." Her form began to fade. "And you, I'm part of both now. Tell them what we were, Calren. Tell them we were worth remembering." He reached for her, but she was gone. The sky shimmered faintly, and for the first time in years, the hum was silent. Far beyond Grevak, the signal continued to travel, fractured, imperfect, filled with echoes of laughter and sorrow. Somewhere in the endless dark, other monoliths awakened, their perfect patterns corrupted by a new sound, the sound of humanity. The world that woke after the explosion was not the same one that had burned. The storm-lit sky of Grevak was clear for the first time in living memory. The perpetual bruise of violet clouds had thinned to reveal a pale dawn, yellow-white and almost gentle. The air smelled of iron dust and ozone and something new, something alive. Yet the land bore the marks of ruin. Vast plains of cracked glass stretched to the horizon, interrupted only by blackened towers that leaned like dying trees. Calren stood amid the wreckage, every muscle aching. The echo engine was gone, reduced to a crater that still smoked faintly. His suit's power reserves blinked in warning red. He should have been dead a dozen times over, yet somehow he had endured. He coughed, tasting blood and ash. The silence around him was oppressive. It was not true silence. No world was ever truly still, but the hum, that low constant resonance that had haunted the colony since their first day on Grevak, was gone. The absence of it made his ears ring. He turned toward the horizon, expecting to see the ridge aflame, but the monolith was no longer there. In its place stood a vast chasm, circular and deep, rimmed with still glowing veins of silver. The structure had collapsed inward, as if it had chosen to retreat rather than die. Calren forced himself to move. His body felt heavy, slower than it should have been. The radiation from the explosion had probably damaged more than his nerves. Each step sent pain lancing up through his spine, yet he walked, because standing still meant surrender. Halfway across the plain, he saw movement. A figure staggered out from a fissure in the glass, wrapped in torn metallic fabric. Calren's heart froze until he realized it was not one of the altered colonists. The eyes were human, uncertain, blinking against the light. It was Haven. The officer's face was scarred, his left arm missing below the elbow, the flesh cauterized. He fell to his knees when he saw Calren. "You're alive," Calren said, running to him. Haven managed a grim smile. "Barely, thought I was the last one. Maybe we both are." The older man coughed, the sound raw. "What did you do?" "I broke the link. The network, the stone, all of it. It was using us to call more of its kind. The echo engine disrupted its harmony." Haven's expression twisted between awe and horror. "You tore the mind of a god." Calren shook his head. "No, I reminded it that gods can bleed." They sat in silence for a while, the wind whispering through the cracks in the glass. When Haven finally spoke again, his voice was hollow. "There are others, scattered. Some didn't change completely before the light stopped. They're confused, half them, half us." Calren frowned. "Where?" "North Ridge. The ruins of the habitation dome." He helped Haven to his feet. Together they started walking. The survivors they found were ghosts of humanity. A dozen men and women huddled among the collapsed structures. Their skin shimmered faintly, like mica beneath sunlight, but their eyes were human again, tired, hollow, yet free. When they saw Calren and Haven approach, fear flickered across their faces. One woman stepped forward, her hair streaked with silver threads that pulsed faintly. "You're the one who did this," she said, voice trembling. Calren nodded. "I stopped them." "Stopped them?" she echoed. "I can still hear them, faint, distant, but there, like echoes under water." "They're gone," Haven said sharply. The woman shook her head. "No, just sleeping." Her words settled over the group like dust. Calren crouched by a damaged water recycler, checking the filter. It still functioned barely. "Then we rebuild," he said. "We make this world ours again before they wake." "Rebuild?" Haven laughed bitterly. "With what? Half our people are missing, our machines are dead, and the sky itself feels wrong." Calren met his gaze. "We start small, shelter, food. Signal to orbit. Someone will hear us eventually." Haven's silence stretched long enough that Calren thought he would argue again. Instead, the man just nodded. "You always were too stubborn to die. I take that as a compliment." They worked until night fell. The survivors scavenged what little equipment remained. Solar converters half melted, plasma cutters from the mining rigs, food rations still sealed in polymer. The work was clumsy and slow, but it was work, and that alone gave them purpose. Yet when darkness came, the unease returned. The stars above had changed. Their positions were wrong, shifting subtly from one hour to the next, as if the sky itself was alive. Some stars pulsed faintly, like beacons answering a forgotten call. Calren stared upward, a cold dread forming in his stomach. "They're not done with us," he whispered. Haven followed his gaze. "Then we finish what you started." Over the following weeks, the survivors rebuilt a crude camp within the remains of the colony's central square. The glass planes reflected sunlight during the day and glowed faintly at night, providing both warmth and unease. Calren repaired what machinery he could salvage, using fragments of the Echo engine as a new power source. He called the resulting device the Heartline. It was smaller, less volatile, a pulse generator that produced controlled harmonics meant to interfere with any returning stone signals. It could not speak to the aliens, only block them. He built it to buy time, but time was running out. The survivors began hearing whispers again, faint vibrations through the metal structures, rhythmic pulses echoing through the ground. At first they dismissed it as wind. Then one night the earth glowed faintly beneath their camp, tracing lines in the same geometric patterns that had marked the ridge before. "The infection's coming back," Haven said grimly. "No," Calren said. "It's something new, different frequency, they're adapting." He increased the Heartline's output. The light patterns faded temporarily, but not completely. That night he dreamed again of Mara. She stood on the ridge, her form translucent, her eyes bright with distant starlight. "You can't stop what you taught them," she said. "You gave them curiosity, they will not let it die." "I gave them choice," Calren said. "Let them choose not to return." "They can't. Curiosity is their hunger. They'll follow the echo until they understand it or destroy it. Then they'll have to go through me." She looked sorrowful. "You still don't understand. You're already part of them. Every thought, every feeling you fed into that machine, those became their blueprint for humanity. You are their teacher and their enemy." Calren woke with sweat cold on his skin. The Heartline pulsed steadily beside him, but faintly now, as if struggling. Outside, the horizon was glowing again. By morning, the first of the altered colonists had begun to change once more. The silver in their veins pulsed brighter, threading beneath the skin. Their eyes flickered with reflected light, and they spoke in unison during sleep. Calren ran every scan he could, but there was no clear cause, no radiation spike, no electromagnetic surge. Only one explanation fit. "They're reaching through them," he said to Haven, "using the memory network still trapped in their bodies." "Then we cut it out," Haven said flatly. "That would kill them. They're already dying." Calren looked around at the faces of those they had saved, people who had shared laughter and pain, who had clawed their way back from oblivion. He refused to lose them again. "No, we isolate them. Build shields around the camp." "Out of what? Glass and willpower? If that's what it takes." Haven scowled but didn't argue further. They scavenged old mining panels to form a crude Faraday cage, using what remained of the colony's reactors to power it. When they activated the barrier, the pulsing beneath the survivors' skin dimmed. For the first time in days, the night stayed dark. Calren allowed himself to believe for a moment that they might truly win. Then the stars began to move. It started as a flicker near the horizon, a single bright point where no star should be, then another and another. The lights arranged themselves in a pattern eerily familiar. The same concentric map Mara had traced months ago, the same pattern burned into the glass planes. Haven's voice was grim. "They're coming back." Calren adjusted the Heartline's power to maximum. The generator whined, the ground vibrating beneath their feet. "If we can block the signal long enough, maybe they'll lose the trail. And if they do, then we fight. Against gods, against memories." The light in the sky grew stronger, forming a ring that shimmered across the atmosphere. Then slowly, a shape began to emerge within it, vast, geometric, and unmistakably artificial. A ship, but not like the others that had descended before. This one was fractured, flickering between form and void, as though it were half alive, half memory. The hum of its engines carried through the air itself, a sound that was both music and pain. Calren's chest tightened. "That's not them. It's both of us." The Heartline emitted a sharp, piercing tone. The survivors screamed, clutching their heads. Haven stumbled. "What did you do?" "It's not me," Calren shouted. "They're using the signal." The Heartline's coils began to glow white-hot. He slammed the controls, trying to shut it down, but it refused to obey. From the ship above came a voice, not through sound, but directly into every mind within reach. "We remember you, Calren Havel." He fell to his knees, clutching his skull. "Get out of my head. You are our beginning. You are our contradiction. Haven staggered forward, firing his rifle uselessly at the sky. What are they saying? They've merged it all, the stone, the humans, the network. They're not separate anymore. We have seen your defiance. We have learned your pain. Now we return it to you. The ground split open again. Light poured upward, forming pillars that linked the shattered monolith sites across the planet. The survivors screamed as the air thickened with static. Calren crawled toward the heartline. You wanted to learn us, he gasped. Then learn what it means to die trying. He tore the core from the machine, exposing the pulse generator. The raw energy lashed his hands with heat and light. He aimed it at the nearest pillar and activated the overload manually. A burst of sound erupted, a pure, defiant scream that shook the sky. The pillars shattered. The ship flickered, unstable. The voice faltered. You cannot destroy memory. No, Calren said, forcing the words through gritted teeth. But you can forget. He triggered the final sequence. The generator detonated in a wave of harmonic shock that rolled across the world. The light faded. The hum ceased. When Calren opened his eyes again, the ship was gone. The stars were still. Only a quiet wind moved through the ruins. The survivors gathered in silence. Their silver veins no longer glowed. Their eyes were human once more. Haven clapped a hand on Calren's shoulder. If they come back again, then we remind them again. Haven looked at the broken sky, at the fractured beauty of the horizon. You think they'll remember what you taught them? Calren stared toward the crater where the ridge had once stood. I think they'll never forget. He turned his gaze upward, toward the empty heavens. Somewhere out there, the echoes of their defiance would travel forever, a human voice carried on a wave of impossible sound. And perhaps, one day, someone would answer. The day after the ship vanished, the world seemed to breathe again. The winds no longer carried that electric sharpness, and the glow that once lived beneath the glass plains faded into dull gray. For the first time since landing on Grevak, the survivors could sleep without the hum gnawing at the edge of their minds. Calren woke early, long before the twin suns rose. His hands were wrapped in bandages, the skin beneath scorched from the heartline's overload. Every time he flexed his fingers, pain lanced up his arm, but he ignored it. The work could not wait. He climbed what was left of the central spire, a jagged tower of fused alloy that once supported the communications dish. From that height, he could see the desolation in all directions, a vast expanse of shattered plains, streaked with faint silver veins that faded more with each sunrise. The ridge was gone entirely, consumed by the final blast. Yet in the distance, he saw something new, tiny columns of smoke, straight and pale against the horizon. He smiled grimly. They're alive out there. Behind him, Haven's voice was a graveled rasp. Or something else is. Calren turned. The older man's wounds were mostly healed, but his eyes were harder now, less the soldier, more the survivor. You think they'll come back, Calren said. I know they will, Haven replied. You don't wipe out a hive and expect the drones to stay dead. Something learned from us. That ship wasn't an invasion, it was a reflection. Calren nodded slowly. Then maybe we can talk to them before the next reflection begins. Talk, Haven gave a hollow laugh. You've seen what happens when we talk. They rewrite the conversation, then we write louder. By the third day, the first group of wanderers arrived. They were gaunt, dehydrated, half-mad from exposure, but human. One woman carried a child no older than 6, its hair streaked with metallic dust that glittered when the light caught it. When she saw Calren, she dropped to her knees, sobbing. You did it, she said. The voices stopped. We thought we'd lost the world. Calren knelt beside her, helping her stand. The world isn't lost, just changed. Over the next week, more survivors appeared, 20, then 40, until their camp became a settlement. Calren directed the rebuilding with mechanical precision. He divided the survivors into crews, scavengers for resources, engineers for reconstruction, healers for the altered. The word colony no longer fit. They were something new now, something between what they had been and what they had fought. When Haven proposed calling their settlement Haven, Calren almost laughed. The irony was too perfect, but the name stuck. 2 months passed. The storms that had once raged endlessly across the plains no longer came. The twin suns shone more brightly each day, warming the cracked glass and coaxing patches of red moss to life. The survivors learned to cultivate it. It grew quickly, and when ground and boiled, became a bitter but nourishing paste. Yet Grevak was not finished testing them. One evening, while Calren and Haven were repairing the solar collectors, the sky flickered. For a heartbeat, the suns dimmed. Then a shimmer rippled across the horizon like heat mirage. Haven froze. "Tell me you saw that." "I saw it," Calren said. They watched in silence as the shimmer grew. It wasn't light, it was distortion, bending space like a curtain drawn tight. The survivors pointed and murmured, fear returning to their eyes. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. Calren turned to Haven. "Prepare the Heartline, but we dismantled it. Then build another." By dawn, Haven was a frenzy of activity. The settlers tore apart old reactors, stripped cables, scavenged every scrap of conductive metal left in the ruins. Calren worked without rest, sketching designs in the dirt, adjusting frequencies, recalculating resonance intervals. The Heartline would be stronger this time, but it would need an anchor, something capable of focusing the harmonic pulse across the entire planet. He found his solution in the shards of the ridge monolith. The fragments still hummed faintly, resonating with a frequency that was neither human nor alien. When he placed his hand upon one, it vibrated softly beneath his palm, like a heartbeat waiting for command. Haven saw the look in his eyes and frowned. "You can't be serious. It's the only material that can handle the power," Calren said. "They built these stones to endure the collapse of stars. They also built them to enslave minds. I'll change that part." Haven scowled. "You keep saying you can change them, but what if you're wrong? What if all you're doing is teaching them how to kill us faster?" Calren didn't answer immediately. He was tired of explaining himself to men who hadn't seen what he had seen in the heart of the stone, those impossible shapes that hinted at curiosity, not malice. "Then at least we'll have taught them courage," he said finally. The new Heartline took 3 weeks to complete. It stood in the crater of the original explosion, a tower of fused glass and silver that pulsed with slow, rhythmic light. At its core lay the largest fragment of the monolith, wrapped in coils of copper and insulated crystal. The survivors called it the Lantern. When Calren powered it for the first time, the air trembled. The light that burst from its tip climbed into the sky, forming a column that seemed to reach beyond the atmosphere itself. The ground quivered beneath their feet, but the frequency was stable. Haven shielded his eyes from the brilliance. "You're calling to them again," he said quietly. "No," Calren replied. "I'm calling to us." "What does that mean?" Calren looked at the horizon, where the shimmer had appeared before. "If they come back, I want them to see what we built, to see that we survived without them. Humanity's signal is not a cry for help, it's a declaration." Haven said nothing more, but he stood beside Calren as the column of light painted the night sky. Weeks passed with no sign of the shimmer. The settlers relaxed, convinced that the lantern's light was a ward rather than a beacon. Calren let them believe it. For once, there was laughter in Haven again. Children played among the wreckage of the old colony domes. New structures rose from scavenged alloy, their angular designs shaped by necessity rather than beauty. The survivors began writing again, journals, stories, even a few crude carvings on the glass planes depicting their victory. Humanity was remembering itself. Calren should have been satisfied. But at night, when the winds whispered across the lantern, he could still hear the faint echo of voices, his own voice among them, repeating the words he had spoken to the stone before the explosion. "You can learn from us, but you cannot take us." The echo no longer sounded alien, it sounded human. The change came suddenly, as it always did. One morning, the lantern dimmed. Its pulse faltered, then steadied again at a slightly different rhythm. Calren was at its base within minutes, scanning the energy output. Everything was stable, too stable. Perfect equilibrium was not possible for a human device. Something was maintaining it from the other side. He called for Haven. Together they examined the readings. The frequency had shifted by an infinitesimal degree, enough that the harmonics no longer matched the design pattern. They're matching your signal, Haven said, reflecting it back. Calren stared at the data. Not reflecting, responding. You can't believe this is communication. It's too precise to be random. They're not attacking, they're synchronizing. Haven rubbed his temple. If you keep listening, they'll find a way in again. You'll undo everything you saved. Calren hesitated. The memory of Mara's final words haunted him. You are their contradiction. Maybe that was the point. We can't spend forever hiding behind walls, he said. If they learned from us, then maybe we can learn from them. He adjusted the frequency dial by a fraction. The lantern pulsed brighter, humming like a living heart, and then the world answered. The light that spilled from the horizon was different this time, gentler, diffuse, like dawn filtered through water. It washed over the plains, over Haven, over every scar that Grevak bore. The survivors panicked at first, running for cover, but the light was warm, harmless. Calren stood unmoving, eyes fixed on the horizon. Out of the glow, a shape materialized. Not a ship, not a weapon, something like a veil woven from memory itself. Patterns flickered across it, the faces of the lost, the ruins of the colony, the echo engine, the storms. It was as though the planet's entire history had been projected into the air, and at the center stood a figure. It looked human, almost. Its body shimmered with translucent threads, and its face shifted between familiarity and alien symmetry. When it spoke, the voice was layered, Calren's tone intertwined with others, echoing from the lantern itself. We heard your call, it said. We remember your defiance. Haven raised his rifle. Step back, Calren. No, Calren whispered. This is what we fought for, to be seen. The figure tilted its head, studying them. We were lost in the pattern you broke, fractured, scattered, but your signal gathered us again. You showed us the shape of choice. Calren swallowed hard. You came to finish what you started. No. We came to begin what you would not. It extended a hand. The light within its palm shimmered with familiar geometry. The lattice of the stone softened, altered. We offer exchange, memory for memory, no dominance, no control. Haven stepped forward, eyes narrowed. Why should we trust anything you say? Because we remember fear, the figure said softly, and we learned it from you. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the hum of the lantern, perfectly matched to the rhythm of the being's pulse. Then Calren reached out, his hand trembling. If this is a trap, he said, you'll find we've grown teeth since the last time. The being smiled, or seemed to. Then we will learn to respect them. Their hands met. What followed was not pain. It was memory, an unfolding of lives, a sharing without words. Calren saw through its eyes, vast networks of light spanning galaxies, the birth of stars, the grief of losing form and meaning when confronted by humanity's chaos. The alien saw through his, the stubborn will to build, to defy, to endure against a universe that cared nothing for survival. When the vision ended, Calren was on his knees, gasping. The being still stood before him, calm. You see now, it said, we are both echoes. You are not the first to reach for understanding, and we are not the last to seek it. Calren looked up, tears in his eyes. What happens now? Now we learn together, or we fade apart again. The being extended its other hand, gesturing toward the sky. The shimmer widened, revealing countless points of light, not ships, but windows. Through them, Calren glimpsed other worlds, other civilizations caught between evolution and extinction. Haven's voice was hoarse. You're opening the gate. The being nodded. The universe remembers courage. We followed it here. Calren rose slowly. Then let's show it what we've learned. That night, under the twin suns, humanity's first alliance was forged, not through conquest or surrender, but through remembrance. The lantern's light became the bridge between species, its pulse a heartbeat shared by two minds that had once been enemies. The settlers of Haven stood together, watching the shimmer expand until it touched the stars. Some wept, others prayed. Calren simply stood in silence, feeling the pulse of the world steady beneath his feet. Haven approached him. So this is it, we just share. For now, Calren said, it's better than erasing. You think they'll keep their word. They don't make promises the way we do, they make patterns, and patterns can change. Haven looked at him for a long time, then nodded. Then I guess we keep teaching. Calren smiled faintly, and hope our students never stop asking questions. When dawn came, the shimmer faded. The being was gone, leaving only a faint resonance in the air, a sound like breath between heartbeats. The settlers went about their work, cautious but unafraid. The lantern continued to pulse, steady and gentle. For the first time since humanity had set foot on Grevak, the world felt alive. Calren stood at the edge of the crater, watching the suns climb higher. He thought of Mara, of the countless others who had vanished into the light. Perhaps they were part of the pattern now, scattered through memory but never lost. He whispered to the wind, "We are still here." And somewhere, faint and distant, the universe whispered back. The shimmer above Grevak faded to a pale scar across the dawn sky, lingering like a memory that refused to disappear. Months passed, then more. The world changed quietly. What had been a ruin of ash and glass became a place of strange beauty, scarred, yes, but alive in ways no one could have imagined before the Echo War. Haven stood at the center of it all, a mosaic of alloy and stone, rebuilt again and again until it resembled neither human colony nor alien artifact, but something between. Towers grown from crystallized glass hummed faintly in the wind. The air itself felt cleaner, as if the world was learning how to breathe with its new inhabitants. Calren watched it from the northern ridge one morning, his shadow long against the red sand. His beard had grown streaked with white, his skin hardened from sun and radiation, but his eyes still carried that relentless spark that had driven him since the first day on this cursed planet. Haven joined him, his limp more pronounced now. "You've been up here since dawn," he said. Calren smiled faintly. "Habit, the suns still surprise me. Every day they rise, I expect to see the world burning again." "It's holding together," Haven said. "Better than we did once. Maybe it learned from us." The soldier grunted. "Don't start that again. You've been saying the same thing for months. The planet's learning. You make it sound alive. Maybe it is." Haven frowned, though not with anger, more curiosity. "You mean the alien presence, the memory network?" "I mean all of it," Calren said. "The lantern, the shards, the resonance patterns we left running through the ground. The line between machine and organism doesn't mean much here anymore. I think we seeded the world with our defiance, and it's growing." Haven stared at the horizon where faint crystalline vines shimmered in the heat. "If that's true, maybe it'll do a better job than we did." "Maybe," Calren said quietly, "but it'll still need someone to show it how to hope." The lantern still stood in the crater, brighter than ever. Its pulse had deepened over time, the rhythm slower, steadier, like the heart of the planet itself. The settlers treated it with a reverence bordering on worship. Children left carved stones at its base, etching symbols that mixed human letters with alien geometry. They called it the Bridge. Calren hated the name at first. It sounded too final, too certain, but as the years passed, he realized it was fitting. The lantern had indeed become a bridge between the living and the lost, between past and future, between one kind of thought and another. At night, when he sat alone beside its glow, he could feel the faint touch of the memory network. It no longer spoke in words, but in impressions, curiosity, patience, warmth. He sometimes imagined it was Mara reaching out from whatever realm she had joined. Other times, he thought it was the world itself dreaming of what came next. On the 100th cycle after the Echo War, the lantern pulsed differently. Calren woke instantly. The light was no longer white but soft blue, rippling outward in waves. He called the alarm. Within minutes, the settlers gathered. Haven arrived last, rifle slung over his shoulder, though it hadn't been used in years. "What is it?" he asked. Calren's voice was low. "It's the same frequency as before, the same pattern they used to arrive. But it's cleaner, calmer." Haven's hand tightened around the rifle. "You think they're coming back? I think they already have." The ground trembled. Above them, the blue shimmer split the clouds like a seam unzipping the sky. Light poured down, yet there was no sound of thunder, no crack of energy, only stillness. From within the light, something descended. It was not a ship this time, nor a projection. It was a seed, a sphere of glass no larger than a human heart. It floated to the base of the lantern and stopped, hovering inches above the ground. The settlers drew back, murmuring. Calren stepped forward alone. The sphere pulsed with soft light, matching the beat of his own pulse. "Don't," Haven warned. Calren ignored him and reached out. His fingers brushed the surface, and warmth spread through his skin, an old, familiar warmth, like the hum of the stone before it turned to pain. A voice entered his mind, not alien this time, but layered and gentle. "You taught us to remember choice. We offer you a future built from it." Calren's breath caught. "You came back. We never left. We became what you made possible." Images flooded his mind, worlds blooming in light, networks growing across void and matter, species once trapped in fear learning to speak through the resonance humanity had created. The alien consciousness had changed, merged with what humanity had taught it. It was no longer the invader, nor even the teacher. It was something new. The voice continued. "You called your creation Haven, we call it the beginning." Calren's throat tightened. "What do you want from us?" "To learn what you will become when the echoes fade." Then the sphere sank slowly into the ground, fusing with the lantern. The blue light spread outward in concentric ripples that rolled across the plains, turning the glassy wasteland into glittering crystal fields. The settlers gasped. Moss and crystalline vines began to grow instantly, wrapping the ruins, climbing the broken towers, transforming them into translucent forests of light. The world was rewriting itself, alive and vibrant and strange. Haven stepped forward, staring in disbelief. "What is this?" Calren smiled faintly. "It's what happens when memory evolves." In the following months, Grevak became something no one could fully comprehend. The ground shimmered with energy flows that powered every rebuilt structure without fuel. Water condensed naturally in channels shaped by the crystalline growths. Plants no human had ever planted grew in fractal patterns, feeding the soil instead of depleting it. But the strangest change was within the people. The settlers began to dream collectively. They described visions of distant stars, of vast corridors of light filled with shapes that felt both familiar and foreign. When Calren studied the data from their sleep monitors, he realized the truth. The dreams were synchronized through the lantern. "It's building a network," he told Haven one night. "Not a prison, an invitation. It's letting us see how it sees." Haven shook his head. "That sounds like the beginning of the end." Calren looked at the lantern glowing in the distance, or the start of something better. A decade passed. Haven thrived. The descendants of the first colonists grew up without fear of the hum, without knowledge of what the world had once been. To them, Grevak was home, a world of beauty, not trauma. Calren grew old watching them. His hair turned silver, his hands more scar than skin. He spent his final years recording everything that had happened, from the first landing to the final awakening. He called it the Testament of Defiance. One evening, he sat beneath the lantern with a child from the new generation. Her name was Sira, and she was curious in the way all children are before the world teaches them restraint. "Tell me again," she said, "about the day the stars fell." Calren smiled. "The stars didn't fall, Sira, they came to listen." "Why? Because we shouted loudly enough for them to hear." She frowned. "Were they bad?" "No, just lost. Like us?" "Yes," he said softly, "exactly like us." She stared at the lantern's glow, her eyes reflecting its shifting light. "Do you think they'll come back again?" Calren looked at the endless horizon where the shimmer once tore the sky open. "They never left. They're in the world now, in us. Everything we build carries their mark and ours." Sira considered that. "Then we'll build something beautiful." He laughed quietly, the sound rough but warm. "I think you already are." Calren died beneath the lantern on the first day of the twin suns' alignment. The settlers buried him at the ridge where he had once watched the world burn. They carved into the crystal there. He taught the stars to listen. For years afterward, the lantern continued to pulse, its rhythm slowing as if mourning. Then, one morning, it stopped. The light faded. The hum vanished. For the first time in generations, the world was still. The people of Haven gathered in silence, uncertain. Some feared it was the end. Others whispered that it was only sleeping. Then, as the suns reached their zenith, a new light appeared, not from the lantern, but from the sky. It was faint at first, a streak of silver against the blue, but it grew rapidly until it filled the heavens. The settlers gasped, shielding their eyes. A voice, soft and unmistakably human, echoed across the plains. "We remember you, Calren Havel. The world you built endures. The pattern you began continues beyond the stars. Humanity has reached us." The voice faded, leaving only the whisper of wind through crystalline leaves. Sira, now grown and wearing the mantle of leadership, stood before the lantern's remains. She placed her hand on its cold surface and whispered, "Then we'll meet them halfway." Generations later, when ships bearing the mark of a reborn humanity landed on Grevak, they found a world transformed. Cities of light rose from crystalline plains. Forests of glass and living metal shimmered beneath the suns. And at the heart of it all, a tower of fused stone and copper, the lantern stood as both monument and beacon. The explorers found carvings in the tower's base, written in a script that mixed human and alien symbols. Translated, it read, "We remembered, we adapted, we became." They called the world Haven's child. And when the settlers activated their recorders to send a message back to the stars, they heard a sound beneath the static, a steady pulse, faint but unmistakable, a heartbeat, human, alien, eternal, the weight of tomorrow carried forward by both.